So I want to talk to you about two terms that you hear a lot when you're talking about seed, and that is open pollinated versus hybrid. Now these two terms can sound a little bit confusing, and it's sometimes hard to know how they affect you when you're choosing your seed. So I thought we'd just talk about what the difference is and what they both mean. Now, the vast majority of seed that is sold in the UK is hybrid seed. Now that is basically an unstable genetic cross. That is where a human being has taken two plants and cross-pollinated them to create a plant that has specific characteristics. So basically say you have a plant that only grows to a certain height, and you have another plant that's very disease resistant. They're going to take those two plants, they're going to cross-pollinate them, and you end up with the seed that they create being a plant that only grows to a certain height and is resistant to a certain disease. Now that sounds great, and it certainly has its benefits, but the one thing that it doesn't tend to take into consideration with these crosses is flavour. So you have a plant that is bred specifically to solve a problem, but it doesn't necessarily taste terribly good. Now you'll be able to identify hybrid seed when you're looking at it, because on the seed packet, after the name of the variety, it will say F1. That basically means it's a hybrid. Now, open pollinated seed is genetically stable, and it pollinates as a result of nature, so either by insects or by wind, no human intervention at all. If you take the seed from that plant and you sow it again, you're going to get exactly the same plant as what it came from. Now with hybrid seed, it's an unstable genetic cross. So if you saved the seed and you sowed it, a plant would grow, but it wouldn't be the same plant as what you saved it from. So say you had a tomato that you really, really loved, but it's a hybrid. If you sow it again, you are highly unlikely to get the same tomato. Now, why does that matter? Because you might say, I'll get tomatoes nonetheless, so it's fine. Now, what if one of those parent plants that was crossed to make that hybrid was, for example, very disease resistant, but produced almost no fruit? So you could go through a whole season, nurture your tomato plant that you've saved from your hybrid seed, and end up with a plant that basically doesn't produce any tomatoes for you whatsoever. So it's important that you don't save seed from hybrid plants and sow it again, because you won't get the plant that you wanted from it. Now, open pollinated plants may have been produced by humans, they may have been bred by humans, but they've been bred repeatedly over many generations to be genetically stable. So they may have been a more recent creation, but they're still genetically stable and they still pollinate in the way that nature intended. The other thing to bear in mind with open pollinated seed is that most of the time, these are varieties that have been grown for a really long time purely because they taste really, really good. Now, if you're growing food in your garden, that's basically the reason you're growing it. You want it to taste great. So that is the reason that we only exclusively sell open pollinated seed that reproduces in the way that nature intended and tastes absolutely amazing. If you want to know a bit more about this, why don't you check out our video on heritage and heirloom and what those two terms mean.